Hello. I'm going to give everyone a minute to come in. And as soon as I have confirmation that you all can hear me, we will go ahead and get started. I'm pulling up the questions that were asked in Cool Cats. So, can you guys hear me? Yes. Okay, great. Then let's jump in. So this is going to be our first live open Q&A. I think I did one or two of these when I was podcasting from Analytics. And this is your opportunity to ask any question. That doesn't mean that I will necessarily know the answers. A lot of information is in these FOIA docs. And part of the reason I wanted to do this was, when we're focused on a particular topic, it's really best to keep the podcast, kind of flowing along to keep the questions pinned to that particular topic. So this is your opportunity to, ask questions that aren't pinned to a particular topic. So if you haven't been to all those green hearts, if you haven't been to this channel before, one thing that is a good tip just to make your question kind of pop is to just write the word question in all caps. That just makes it stand out to me. You don't necessarily have to write the question in all caps. In fact, that can make it kind of harder to read. It's easier for us to read sentence case than all caps. And yeah, we'll just go ahead and get started. So I'm going, and also, it's also best to keep the question short. Like, you don't want to write like a paragraph, because I'm not going to read a paragraph, so just try to keep your question kind of focused, and yeah, I'll try to get to as many as I can. So okay, all right, let's see here. So I'm not going to answer all of the questions asked in Cool Cats, because one of the things that I thought about is someone might just ask a question but not be at the live. So I'm just going to pick a few, and then I really kind of want to focus more on the questions in the live, questions that you have because you're here. But sometimes with a Q&A, it can kind of lag a little bit in the beginning. So I wanted to have some questions ahead of time. Someone had asked if I was going to be attending the trials, and that is a big, I don't know. So it will just depend on a lot of factors. 10 weeks is a really long time to stuff. So, he going power. I just don't know. Okay, and let's see. Oh, whoops. I thought I opened up that that particular thread. I clicked on that link. Give me just 1 second. If there are a lot of posts in here. Okay, here we go. Let me try this again. I think the page refreshed. Okay. All right. All right. Okay. So, Jeanette, I won't share last names. I'll just share the first name. Jeanette asked, and then Jeanette is also one of my amazing mods. But she asked, are you aware of anyone with any of the police departments acknowledging any mistakes they made and dropping the ball, resulting in the death of the children and adults that absolutely could have been prevented. Um, no, I'm I'm not. I doubt any of them would make a public statement because that could open them up to lawsuits for like unlawful death or something like that. So that going to happen. Um, okay. Cheryl asked, why did Lori purchase two pair of sandals? I don't know. We did dive into the sandals quite a bit in the group this past weekend, and I forget who it was. I think we have a group just and and zoomed, grabbed uh, interviewed, I think it was, or maybe when she was walking. Whoops. Oh, just one second. Let me. Ah, I have to. My computer bounced me to the weaker network, which kind of flags a little bit in the city. So I am going to switch to the 5G. So I'm going to be gone just momentarily. Okay. All right. So I'll check in just to make sure you guys hear me again. Well, no, I'll keep going. And one of my mods can text me if you can't hear me. Okay. So, um, so someone noticed that. Okay, backing up a little bit, I talked about this in the live from last week with Lori's travels. One of the things that was very surprising to me is that the FOIA docs actually described the sandals that she bought, and uh, the one pair was described as brightly colored with yellow and green and it said possibly another color, or no, those were yellow and green. And then the other pair were black and white. And that one, it said, possibly had another color. And someone saw that the flip flops that Tylee was wearing when she was interviewed were yellow and green. So the yellow and green ones are accounted for. The black and white ones, it it's really hard to tell what color Lori's sandals are. I only see like light pink on the top. So, it's hard to know like because it said that they were black and white stripe. So that could have been the pattern that like her would have been covered by her foot. So or they could have possibly been sandals for JJ. So who knows? But I would venture to guess that if it was JJ, I suspect with JJ that he was probably drugged, and so that he wouldn't hear the commotion, and so that he wouldn't wake up early because he was an early riser. So if a pair was for JJ, I suspect it was. Probably because he was carried out without shoes. Otherwise, if they were for Tylee and Lori, I suspect that they stepped in blood or that Lori was afraid that there could be trace amounts of blood on the sandals. So I mentioned this in another live, but I strongly suspect that there was a significant cleanup effort. Okay. Okay, this question is too long. Was Tammy's body exhumed, autopsied, and then put back all in the same day? Yes. Yes, it was. That was, that was in an article early on. It was within hours. Um, yeah. With Melanie Pulaski being so closely and heavily involved in every step Lori made, why do you think Arizona has not announced any charges against her? Do you think she has been offered a deal to testify against Chad and Lori, or at least Chad? No, I don't. I I think I think with the Arizona departments, even it just seems like even like the least bit of resistance, they would just be like, oh, okay, like they even after Brandon was shot at. I talked about this in the live about Melanie. She went in with her 2-year-old daughter and was interviewed with her 2-year-old daughter. And so we don't have confirmation that her daughter was in the room with her. But I kind of doubt that anyone was offering babysitting services. Now, obviously, judging by the size of their home, yeah, like she could have afforded a babysitter, and she had family in the area. So, and then I dropped a post in the Cool Cats group about this, but like when I think it was Summer was interviewed by Rexburg police when they came to Arizona, to Phoenix, and she had an attorney, so the attorney was present for the interview. But in the FOIA docs that were released around Alex's death, it said something to the effect, and I mentioned this in another live, that they had wanted to interview the names that fit in the redactions. Well, one, Melanie, it was spelled without an E, and Boudreaux fit in the last name, or the second redaction. And the other one, the name that fits is Zulema's daughter, Kara. And so, not a guarantee that it is Kara, but it's definitely Melanie Boudreaux. And it said that they had wanted to interview them, but they both had attorneys. And there's a part of the sentence that's redacted afterwards. So, who knows, there could have been some other factor, but it just seemed like, if there was any kind of pushback, it's like they just moved on. And there was even a note that like the FBI agent or agents, I think it was just one, who interviewed Melanie and Ian, knew that Melanie was being dishonest, but they didn't press her because Ian was cooperating with the investigation. And that was after Ian had said, forget it, I'm not doing this anymore. So I don't know what's up with that. But so I don't know. But okay, I'm going to switch to the live questions because I just don't want to overlook people who are actually in the live. So if you're in Cool Cats and you dropped a question in there, please drop it in the live. Also, you can just copy and paste it or whatever. Okay. Okay. All right. So Cynthia asked, do you think there will be more people charged as the truth comes out in trial? Possibly, but I just it just seems like they're just focused really on the big fish, Lori and Chad. So I've given up most hope that anyone else will be held accountable. Um, so, again, I would rather be pleasantly surprised than then have to continue to make room for all of this anger and frustration. Um, yeah. Suzanne said, I hate when the media leaves out Joe in all of this. Joe was her first victim. I'm reading what she said. I've made a case for why I don't know that he was her first victim, but there are very suspicious signs in the pictures that were taken the day his body was found that I think at least warrants an investigation. But so I think they probably leave him out because it wasn't ever confirmed that it was a murder. And technically, none of these murders have been confirmed. I mean, then nothing will be confirmed until they're found guilty by a jury of their peers. So I suspect that's why they did it. I do appreciate that. I mean, Dateline, I think, has gone the extra mile in including Joe, and not for sentimental purposes. I think, you know, I know that they're uh yeah, the amount of investigation that they do behind the scenes, especially their main producer, I mean, it is absolutely astounding. And then you see other shows where, yeah, yeah, I mean, it's where you're just like, did you even skim through the FOIA docs? Like, this is so far off. It's just not even, it's embarrassing. But okay. So Bernard asked, what's your opinion of Lori's mental status from your interactions with her? Do you think she may be schizophrenic or simply malingering? I mean, I have no doubt that she is under duress. Early on, she was exhibiting a lot of arrogance and, just, uh, just flippant, like disregard. And I don't think it helped that she had an attorney who really played into that. I suspect, he himself, I'm talking about Mark Means, suffers from a serious case of arrested development. So I think, he fed a lot of that. And so I don't doubt that the reality hit her hard. Um, and I don't think that Lori's used to ever having her, well, probably not ever, but for the most part, she's not used to having her feet held to the flames, and so I think eventually the reality, started to set in, and that, you know, um, that she wasn't going to be able to charm her way out of this one. And, she was the most hated mom in America. And even when she would walk into the courtroom and had her nose up in the air and stuff, I saw shame and embarrassment. I think it's very difficult for her to process, just the reality of what she's done. So I have no doubt that she's under duress. Uh, as far as schizophrenia goes, I had experience with that growing up because my biological mother was schizophrenic. So I never saw, I mean, I have no training as a mental health professional or, anything like that. So I have absolutely no business, weighing in on someone's, mental status. But I never saw signs of schizophrenia in her. I do think that she had, religious delusions, and there were some things that she said that, at the time I just wasn't sure what was like LDS teaching and what was just, her kind of having a warped view of the world. I I did feel like she just wasn't really tethered to this world. It was just like she just talked, just like she was very focused on like just going to heaven. Like none of this matters because, you know, we're just going to heaven. So, yeah. So I don't know. Okay. Clara asked, who do you believe was the ringleader slash puppet master? I I plan to do a live on this, but the too long didn't read version. After spending really, really considerable time digging into this, and even as I was reading the FOIA docs, I was entertaining this thought of, like who is the ringleader? I just don't think that there was a ringleader. I think that some of Lori's friends, like Zulema and Melanie, and definitely her family, I think that they're trying to pin this all on Chad. And I think in some ways, Chad was more the leader, but in other ways, I think Lori was more the leader. But even with some of the, things that Zulema and or Melanie Gibb said, Chad did, it wasn't true. So I will give this its own live, and I'll make my case. So I don't just like weigh in lightly on, especially on topics like this, but we have a lot of text interactions between Lori and Zulema and Chad, and those text messages in particular, I think, kind of threw a pretty bright light on this issue. So, I like I said, I will dedicate a live to this topic because I have a lot of screenshots set aside for that topic in particular. Okay. Jenny asks, do you think Lori has it in her to have tried committing suicide, hence the confusion over her being found competent, like she is competent, but now a danger to herself? Mm, it's hard. It's hard to know. You know, I've read that typically narcissists tend not to commit suicide. So, you know, who knows? Uh, yeah, I just don't know. Knowing the little bit that I know about um, Lori, I think she'll do anything to try to evade consequences for her actions. And so I mean, this is just that this is not based on any kind of information. I don't have any kind of inside source giving me any kind of information. So don't look anything beyond this is just my thinking. That's it. In the absence of any information except, just my experience with Lori. So, um, and I say things like that just to protect the integrity of when I do share information that's been shared by, some kind of confidential source. So, having laid out all of that, I imagine that Lori would know how to act in such a way as to give the impression that she can't assist in her own defense. So I imagine she would probably go more the route of like excited utterances and, you know, like God told me that, yada, yada, yada. So, just to sound as crazy as possible. But when you look at all of her interactions, like, again, having had a mother who was schizophrenic, she couldn't just turn it off and turn it on. Now, that doesn't mean that, I'm any kind of authority on schizophrenia. I'm sure there could be different expressions of it. And, she was my only experience with someone who was, you know, um, you know, schizophrenic. But she couldn't blend. Like, there was no blending. She when 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 you were with her anywhere, whether it was, like a Burger King when we had supervised visitation, or wherever she was going to draw attention to herself, because she just, like, yeah. So, and she also had, very strong religious delusions. But, again, these delusions made it such that she would never be able to blend in any environment, and so that's the thing. Like, when I read through these documents, you see Lori, like, covering up, like, you see her getting angry at Alex when he said to the bishop that, his sister saw Jesus and talked to Jesus. My my mother wouldn't have gotten angry. She would have told the bishop herself. Like, she was so convinced of her delusions. And so, with Lori, she was, she was calculating. She wasn't intelligent, so eh, her calculations were often, pretty off. And I experienced that firsthand. But she still was making every effort to cover things up, to charm her way, and, cause distractions and stuff. So that's in my opinion, my uninformed opinion, these just aren't the actions of someone who can't help their behavior, and so, um, yeah, so, yeah. So, personally, I think she's malingering. But she's also been in solitary confinement, and I'm sure that, well, not solitary, like actual solitary, but she's been, like, um, kept separate from the other women in the jail that she's in. And I will say this, because she is a super extrovert. Um, w- uh, a few years ago, I passed out on my way to my bed. I suddenly felt really sick, and I passed out. I didn't have any warning that I was passing out. I have no memory of this. I just woke up on the floor, and I had hit my face on the baseboard of my bed on the way down. So my face was like, I looked like I had been attacked, and so I had a not a severe, uh well, I had a head injury, and so I couldn't be on any electronics for a week. My doctor had said, like, you just need to go. It was a pretty, um yeah, it wasn't a moderate concussion. I forget what how she described it, but she said, you need to go into a dark room, no light, like, close your shades, and your brain just needs to heal, and, like, no electronics and stuff. And for that week, and I lived alone, and I mean, by the end of that week, like, I it drove me to drinking. I mean, not literally, it felt that way, like, I felt so isolated after just a week. And one of my friends yelled at me because I was, like, using Siri to, like, dictate messages, and using Siri to, like, listen to messages. And this was, like, pretty far into the week. So where am I going with that? I can't imagine the impact of, 2 years of isolation. I mean, that's what she's had, like, largely just a lot of isolation and just being left with her own thoughts. She's had phone calls from family members and stuff like that, but you know, um, so I would imagine that that's also taken a toll on her. Okay. AA Lauren asked, do you think Adam knew that Charles was going to be murdered slash ambushed that day? Mm, I don't know. I just, I, I, I don't know. I don't know how much he knew. So that's why I did the live on, I kicked this channel off with a live about Adam because, one thing that really kind of tears at me, and this isn't virtue signaling or anything like that, but I really want to be fair. Like, these family members have also suffered. Like, even if they participated in some way or, prioritized Lori over these victims, and I don't justify that in any way, but this family has still been torn apart, and so, I really, when it comes to, especially when it comes to family members, but also other people who were involved, I really just try to, like, stick to the few facts that we have, and some of the stuff is just like kind of a hat tip to, like, the fact that Detective Moffat called Kay 3 times one day, one evening, trying to warn her about Adam, to not trust Adam, that he didn't think that Adam was trustworthy. I thought it was notable that he said he may have called Charles after talking, or no, sorry, that Adam may have called Lori after talking to Charles. And so, yeah, I thought that that was an unusual choice of words, because he they had his phone. So, yeah, I don't know. But at the same time, on the other side of that, and this is how I kind of like torment myself, uh, he did call her 3 times, and then when he couldn't get a hold of her, he passed the message on to Bobby to please let her know this. So whatever he had, whatever information he had, was compelling enough for him to, feel this sense of urgency to tell Kay not to trust Adam. So I don't know. Take that for what it's worth. Um, okay. Yeah, Harley asked, does anyone know how Lori reacted when they told her they found the children? I only know a rumor. Um, so I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't want to say that publicly. Um, okay. Okay, so Celeste asked a combo question, but her main question is, what do you think about the Daybell kids? And yeah, and then I think we should know they're covering for Chad. So yeah, maybe I treat the Daybell kids kind of in the same category. Well, not kind of in the same category as Adam. I think we don't have a lot of visibility into them, because there won't be any FOIA docs released from Idaho. So we have early accounts. And I think before, very, very early on, like when Tammy first died, there were coworkers of Emma who relayed, some of the things that she had said. And there was also a family member who was on one of I forget which, he wasn't in the groups. He was on a different forum, and he also shared information. Um, he protected his name, but and I forget the name of the site, where he was really active for a while. But he also shared information, and so there were just like all these conflicting accounts about how Tammy died, where she was found. I did a whole post of just like I went to all of these different places, and just broke down all of the different claims about Tammy's death, and there are a lot of conflicting stories. So, but one of Emma's coworker said that Tammy was found face down, and there was pink foam coming out of her mouth. And yeah, so there are a lot of like really sketch details out there, and then there's the huge contradiction in Chad's own stories about how Tammy died and when she died. And so I think that there's, there's a lot that's going down. I suspect that um uh, uh, Garth, and I know that Garth was questioned for hours by Rexburg Police or Fremont County. But yeah, so yeah, I and then Garth's own story on, what was it, 48 hours, about how like his he heard a thud, and that's what brought him to the bedroom. But then when he came into the bedroom, his mom was half on and half off the bed. And so then that begs the question, well, what was the thud? And also, a, a dead body isn't going to stay half on and half off the bed. And it was really bizarre the way he described, like, just, like he actually motioned with his hands. So he just like, went over and, basically whoop, hoisted her back onto the bed. So, there's some kind of cover up. He definitely knows more. There's just no question in my mind. He knows more, because these should not be difficult questions to answer. I mean, there's a story of Tammy throwing up on the floor. Then other accounts do not have her throwing up. She died, according to one of Chad's stories, she died in the bed. And another one, I think she was mm, on the floor, but there was also another one where she was on a sofa. And so, yeah, this just shouldn't be this hard. And one person had shared that there was, I think, like a mark on her chest, like a bruise or something. And so, yeah, I yeah, that 48 hours episode, that was very strange, especially with Garth and Emma. So I suspect that both of them know more. We also know that from Chad's neighbor, they had come over that morning, and then they went home and fed their kids breakfast. And when they came back, I think it was like around noon, Chad already had the funeral planned, so yeah, there were just lots. And so I think, obviously, no, I don't think, but a lot more information will come out at the trial. Okay. Um, Jennifer asked, why did Adam move? I I don't know. I know he lost or left his job in Kansas City. I had heard he lost it, but I don't have any confirmation of that. And this was one of the points I made in the live that I did about Adam. Is I think is pretty hard to say that you're ostracized from the family when you move to the same, fairly small city, St. George, Utah, that his parents were living in. And I remember early on in the case, I was like, maybe like the spring of 2020, or maybe it was right after the kids were found. But yeah, there were stories that Barry and Janice had just like one day just up and left their home in Phoenix and had moved to Utah. And there were accounts that their neighbors were very surprised because there was like they didn't know that they were moving. So I imagine they were probably trying to get away from like the scrutiny, and I'm sure they felt ostracized within their church community. But so I know that Adam had gone to visit his parents in St. George, Utah before he moved there. And, he posted pictures on his public Facebook. I think he was like on a snowmobile or ATV or, something like that. And then he ended up moving. And his wife at the time did not move with him. So, you know, so yeah, uh, I don't know. Okay, so Frady asked, "What happened with the clothes of the kids at the house where the kids last lived? Besides the stuff found at the storage unit, the belongings seem to be so scarce." So, um, so I did a post about this in the Cool Cats group. I may do a live around it when the Gilbert police report was released. When that was first released, I was just so burnt out on like FOIA docs and digging into this case and wasn't doing particularly well. And then I just excuse me, someone passed them a reporter, a couple of reporters had passed them on to me, but I just kind of didn't have it in me. And then um, I think it was Justin Lum had a post about Lori gifting her car to Colby. And anyway, that some of the questions swirling around that pulled me back into those documents. But one of the things that stood out to me is there was, like a lot of people were talking about, there were two pair of underwear that people thought were found in one of the cars. And so I went into the FOIA doc, that particular police report, and to try to chase that down. And I actually built out a pretty massive spreadsheet, or a group of spreadsheets, and build it out kind of like a database, trying to chase down where did these two pair of underwear come from. So they actually weren't found in one of the cars, as some people had believed. They were found in a bag, and the chain of not the chain of command, but there was kind of a daisy chain of ownership of this bag. So it was a bag that was found in the house in Rexburg, and they itemized the items in the bag and they tested the DNA. in the underwear. And so they didn't they had like unknown female number 1 and unknown female number 2, because for the one, uh it was tied to one of the Boudreaux girls, and that was the blood that was found on the seatbelt in Lori's Nissan Rogue. And the unnamed female number 2, I I probably will do a live on this, but I pieced together all of the pieces of information about the bag, unredacted one of the names, which Tylee Ryan fit into the name. It was very clear that it was a name because it was, you know, who this bag of clothes belonged to. And anyway, and so yeah, so I feel quite confident that those clothing items belonged to Tylee, and the DNA matched. I believe it was 2 blood stains in Lori's Nissan Rogue. And keep in mind, this is blood that remained after the car was detailed. So we also found out in that document that Colby had gotten the car detailed. So, and that, his mom had passed on the car to him. So there were other stains. There were some that they just couldn't get enough of a sample to get a DNA, like a solid hit. But some of them, they would be confirmed that it was a blood. The stain was caused by blood, but they couldn't, match the DNA, or there wasn't enough of a sample. But also there was a spot of blood on the front passenger, well, the only passenger seat in Alex's truck. And so, anyway, so those are the only clothes that we know about that remained, aside from the few things that were found in the storage unit. And it was really shocking just how little was in that storage unit. And so I just did a post about this past weekend in the Cool Cats group, where I went over all of the footage around the storage units, and was like trying to pinpoint what was taken to the storage units, and what was removed from the storage units. Because when Nate Eaton covered the story, he recycled a lot of the same footage, and he actually shared very little information about most of those days. But I had grabbed these 2 screenshots. Well, yeah, I created 2 screenshots from the Dateline episode that talked about that, because the owner of the storage unit had he had itemized all of the different times that Lori, Alex, or Chad had visited that storage unit. And he had the dates, the times. He even noted like the car, like if it was he would write like PU for pickup, and um, or car for Lori's car. And he also noted if something was brought into the storage unit or taken out. But there was one point where Nate referenced like photo albums, but just looking at the footage that I could find, I don't think it was multiple photo albums. And there was only one. There was one tub, and that had like clothes and stuff, and a a box, a Home Depot box, and then it was like some bikes and a scooter. So there was very little in that storage unit. But when I like kind of zoomed in on the photo album that they showed, I found it was like a sticker, and it had a child's writing Definitely looked like a child's like cursive, and the child had written family. And there isn't a lot of footage of them looking at that particular photo album. But from what I saw, I thought this wasn't a photo album. I think that this was a scrapbooking project that Tylee had done. Like this looked like a girl's handwriting. You know how like when kids are learning to write cursive and everything is just like, you know, a little awkward but perfect. Like the F was perfect. Whereas, after a while, everyone just kind of, develops their own style. But yeah, so I think that this was Tylee's scrapbook, and yeah, it was. Yeah. Anyway, and that's beyond what you asked, but that that's all we have. I mean, there were some winter clothes in there, but other than that, I strongly suspect they had eventually removed all signs of the kids. Yeah, I see people talking about if I should be at the trial. I mean, just a heads up, like after a while, I got so many like kind of like attempts to guilt me, like, Tylee needs you, to be there for support. And I just think it's really sad that blah, 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 blah. One, you're not in my shoes, and two, I absolutely will not be guilted that I somehow have not given enough to this case. So now, just fair warning, I block. I think people were saying really rude things to me on Twitter, on Facebook. I'm like, if the puck gets passed, you get one chance, and then it's just you're just blocked, because 10 weeks, that is a significant amount of time away, lost income, plus increased expenses of just like a hotel and car and all of those things. So yeah, and I have other responsibilities, so I definitely will try to do that, but it it just may not be realistic. And then there's also the consideration of you know can I do that? Can I safely just absorb the all of that information? So um yeah. Okay. um Okay, so Beverly asked, do you think there is any evidence that any other people in the Vallow or Daybell, or, I mean, other than Lori, Chad, Alex, Melanie, were involved in the murders or cover up? Mm, I I do see where law enforcement does, for the most part, exercise a lot more caution in the FOIA docs when it comes to family members. Um, like for example, like their interviews, they're summarized in the FOIA docs, but those audio or video files were not released. And so there's just a lot of caution that's used, so a lot of that information just won't be available to us until the trials. So um yeah, I did think it was interesting that one of the things that I discovered in the FOIA docs is that, and I talked about this, in different lives, but 2 days before Charles was murdered, Lori had a bunch of family at her house. So this was July 9th. And we know that because Melanie Gibb had texted her and Lori was blowing her off. Lori was on the phone with Chad and texting Alex, and she had a lot going on. She was texting her niece Melanie to tell her she can't go to this wedding, and she had just found out about this plot that Adam and Charles had. And um and so she said to Melanie, something to the effect like, all my family is here, with all the kids, something like that. And so we don't know who all was involved, like, all of her family, and with all the kids. So she said something about it being chaos, and Melanie not being denied. She then actually drove to Lori's house and waited out in front of the house until, and then let Lori know that she was there at the house. And then Lori said she could come back if she was quiet. So, yeah. So, I just think that that's very on brand for the Cox family. It's like, you know, they, yeah, everyone is involved, and so, yeah, I don't I don't know. But and we don't even know in the trials how much they will be grilled, but these family members, they're going to be witnesses. They're going to be called as witnesses. And so, so they're going to be grilled on cross. So I think a lot will come out in discovery and stuff. So I do, and I don't say this to be sensationalist at all. That I do suspect this story will get much, much darker. Mm, let's see. Okay, someone asked, do you think Charles had any involvement in Joe's murder? I really just don't know. And it will be an impossible question to ask. We know that around the time that Joe would have died, and I suspect that it was closer to 2 to 3 weeks that he was dead. And Dr. Salerno, she's been on Profiling Evil. I absolutely love her. I love her approach to facts, and she really has been a fantastic source of information for me, because she actually like looked at Joe's autopsy, and one of the points that she made was that, given the, and trigger alert, this is going to get a little graphic, so I will wave when I'm finished being graphic, like if you're queasy, or this is potentially a trigger. So she had made the point that, she, given the description of Joe experiencing skin slippage, she had said that she did not think he was moderately decomposed, which is what the I think it was his autopsy had said. She thought that he was profoundly decomposed. And the police report had also noted that it wasn't, I forget the word that it used, but it was like, it wasn't extreme, but It definitely described a much more advanced state of decomposition. There are also from the pictures, and this I won't go into detail, but it was apparent from the pictures that Joe's body, when they moved, it had basically like somewhat imploded, and you can tell by the difference in the state of the mattress. So that's all I'm going to talk about that. Waving. So the triggers are over. But having said that, that would have coordinated with the time of Charles' mother's death. And so, Charles could have, like, if Lori played a role, and Lori and Alex played a role in Joe's death, that could have been while Charles was at his mother's funeral. So, yeah, so we just don't know. But then I think it's interesting, and I've made this point in another live, that right after Joe was found, Lori takes off for Hawaii, which is very on point for Lori. So that was another really big surprise for me when I was going through the FOIA docs and the interviews of her friends in Hawaii. Just like, you're kidding me. She always takes off when something sketch happens. But so, and now for the 2007 attempt on Joe's life, just knowing the total lack of filter, and I don't say this in like any condemnation of Charles, we will likely never know. But given Lori's complete lack of a filter and the timing of this vacation, I think it would be, a little naive to think that Charles wouldn't have had any idea that this was going down. And mostly because, like, yeah, I mean, some people are naturally just kind of more of a walled garden, and Lori is very much an open garden. And, and I mentioned several times about, like, there was a detail she shared with me, like, afterwards I was like, she has no internal editor, she just says anything. But so, for her to keep that to herself, yeah. And it was a very lavish vacation. So 2007, I think there was just a lot of animosity between Charles and Joe, which I've talked about. It is documented in the FOIA docs around Joe and Lori's divorce, as well as Charles and Charles' divorce. So, yeah, so I don't think there would have been much love lost. Kay Sam asked, do you think Joe had any idea of the extent of Lori's psychopathy? Yes. Just reading some of the FOIA docs around their divorce, and then this other document that someone who was involved in that whole investigation had passed on to me. Yeah, there's no question. I mean, he was sounding the alarm, and others were so concerned about Lori's mental state that there was an intervention plan, like this court hearing that uh the advocate, I can't think of what it's called. It's like the legal advocate for Tylee. I'm blanking on what that's called. Um, the one that she didn't show up for, like, that was an emergency court hearing, and they didn't want to give Lori a heads up about what the nature of this hearing was going to be about, um, because they were afraid that she could harm Tylee or take off. And so, yeah. So, I mean, I just can't imagine the absolute dismay that um, oh, it wasn't the advocate. It was it was uh, the therapist who had evaluated Tylee, Colby, and Joe to assess um, if the kids had been sexually abused and if Joe had been the abuser. Yeah, she just didn't show up, and we know that from Dateline. But I've also seen some of the document or some of the documentation around that. So I mean, like Joe was so close to people recognizing that she was really unwell. She was dangerously psychopathic. But yeah. Okay. Hmm. Cassidy asks, who is the victim you alluded to that may have been Chad's first victim? So Chad in let me see if I can pull this up. Um uh I'll just see really quickly. If I can't pull it up quickly, then I'll just address this in a live. Uh, Trying to think what it would be labeled, the screenshot. I know I grabbed the screenshot, but he talked about um, his death percentages. And yes, I found it. Yes. Um, so it was in the FOIA docs, and let me just read it. Okay, so Chad said to Lori, and sorry, this is gross. Yes, we might need to release a little steam when we talk, and two fire emojis. Gross. Anyway, like he writes, anyway, this is the chart that checks what percentage mortals are still in their body. It worked for my friend's wife who died, my neighbor, George Bush, Stanley, etc. And I know that there was a girl. I don't know if she was his neighbor, but she lived in the same town they lived in. I think it was Springfield or something, who had gone missing. So I remember early on in the case, there were some questions about if Chad had anything to do with that, because someone had said that he they left for Rexburg right after. So I don't know. I haven't confirmed that. But then there was a neighbor, um, Clausen, Eldon Clausen, I think his name was, and there's there's an entire topic in the Cool Cats group around that. But this guy was a really interesting character. He lived in Fremont County, and the, so a group of people who lived in that neighborhood and were very familiar with this person had shared. We had a private interaction, and under the condition of anonymity for all of them, they shared some of the details around this guy's reputation and some of the things that people allege that he was involved in, and they allege that he was part of this group, and um, he was kind of like a self-appointed, like keeper of the I don't I forget. this was last year, but like there were like water rights, and he would walk along the ditch that was along Chad's property and would check to make sure that neighbors weren't using the water when it wasn't their day. I mean, these aren't things that are issues in New York City, but so this was all new to me. But people said he would walk along the ditches in the morning, and even though he wasn't the assigned person to monitor this, he just kind of took it upon himself to do that. And there was someone gave an account, and now I don't remember the source. And this was like year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago. Yeah, somewhere in there. That Chad had lunch with Eldon that week. Well, Eldon died of, I think it was a pulmonary embolism. I'm not exactly sure. And his family didn't want his death investigated, and they were very strongly opposed to anyone talking about, their dad, slash husband slash family member, being involved in this group. And to some degree you can understand that, like, no one wants to be associated with this group given everything that's happened. But anyway, so there are big question marks, because this he died within, I think, 5 days of JJ being buried. So we entertained the possibility that Eldon, and the stories from the neighbors was that he was quite presumptuous. Like, people allege that he, yeah, I won't go into all of it. This is a public channel, and I'm not looking to, you know, um, yeah, some things are just best kept in a private Facebook group. But there were pretty serious allegations made about him, and so there were questions about, like, well, did he possibly see Chad digging a hole that day? Did he see something he shouldn't have? Did he go into, because he was known to go on people's property and kind of poke around. So did he go into the shed where, it's, we know that law enforcement came back with a search warrant to search the shed. And, there are questions about if that's where, and, Chad and whomever may have, dismembered Tylee before burning her remains. And so, there are just a lot of questions around that. And, so I think that he's potentially another victim. But this, this statement that Chad made about these, death percentages, it could be him just wanting to claim that, he's somehow a prophet, or it, could be more dubious than that. Okay. All right. Okay. Not sure how to pronounce your name. Denal. How significant do you think the storage facility footage is, especially regarding the back seat and wheel of the Jeep used in the Boudreaux attempt? I actually think that the storage unit is probably not the most significant piece of evidence, but I was very frustrated this weekend by just like the lack of footage that was actually shared. And it's like, here, like, this storage unit owner was such a beast. Like, to go through all of this footage and identify, like, all of this information, and then to have so little of it passed on, that may have been at the request of law enforcement. But, even that, if that's true, that just, adds a, a question of, how much is law enforcement potentially, controlling the flow of news and stuff. But yeah, so I do think, I mean, the most important thing is obviously that it's used in the trial, but I do think that the the storage unit footage will tell the story of, like, more kind of the backstory, because it's like one of the things that Nate said could be interpreted two different ways. Like, it sounds like he said at one point that when Lori moved, or like opened up the storage unit, that she moved bikes into it. If so, that was early in October, but then we see the bikes being moved in, much later. So, I think it would be interesting. It will be interesting to see how some of these dates correlate with other people potentially visiting. There is this open question of who the mystery woman was in the Ring doorbell footage. So, I mean, it looks and sounds potentially like Summer, her sister. And when they laugh, they sound like, when Lori and this mystery woman laugh, they sound like it's in stereo, and they have very similar, kind of baby girl voices and stuff. So, and this person was also very fascinated with snow. Like, this person ran to this like igloo that was built and stuff. So, and we don't know everyone who came and visited Lori while the kids were gone. I mean, we know Zulema. Well, Zulema visited in between the kids' murders. We know Melanie Gibb, according to a confidential source, Melanie then Boudreaux also visited after both Tylee and JJ were gone. And then we also know that she visited in the end of October, because she signed the lease, and then she and Alex flew to Phoenix. But, there could have been more family members and friends who visited. So I think it'll be interesting to see if the back and forth of items, from her apartment, possibly, to the storage unit and back again. I think that will tell an interesting story of, like, the people who were visiting or coming by. Did they need to think that the kids were there, but, JJ was just visiting his grandparents and Tylee was at school? Or were when some people came, did they need to have all of the stuff gone? So I don't know. But then, like, another big surprise, and I addressed this in the biggest surprise is from the FOIA docs, is now just knowing, like, law enforcement came on, I think it was November 5th, and took the Jeep. And eh, it's astounding to me that they didn't flee then. Like, um, Lori and Chad were in Hawaii on their honeymoon when this happened. They had gotten married and had their honeymoon in Hawaii when the Jeep was taken. But, like, it says that, like, I think it was Detective Hermosillo went to the apartment and no one answered, and so they just towed the Jeep. But then they hung out for another 2 weeks, or more. Yeah, almost 3 weeks. So yeah, so yeah, but it was also interesting to me that, I know that Nate said that there were gun cases that were taken into the storage unit. And so I questioned if Alex's gun on October 9th, when he allegedly approached Tammy, I do believe that he was the masked gunman. But if his gun misfired, I've always wondered if his gun misfired, because I had a gun that misfired a couple times. Um, and so I wondered if he stored his guns in this storage unit. And so going back over the footage, I did note that Nate said that, Alex had um, taken gun cases into the storage unit. So, he could have. There's a possibility that it just wasn't climate controlled enough for guns, and the gun actually could have misfired for that reason. But anyway, so I think it will be interesting. Someone from Cool Cats did reach out. She said she reached out to the storage company owner and asked if he still had the footage, and he said no. Mm. Someone asked, do you think April Raymond may have more information to some of Lori's shenanigans in Hawaii? Yes. Yes, I do. Michelle asked, would I consider writing a book about this? I don't know. I have considered it, but I really don't know if I would do it. If I did, it would be most likely it would be after the case is closed and I get access to the files. So, yeah, because I will want to go through this with a fine tooth comb. And I think it's interesting that, and no disrespect to people who are writing books and doing documentaries, but it's kind of surprising to me that there are documentaries being released so soon, and books, because we don't know half of the story. I mean, unless it's that they're going to write these books, in like, like multiple installments. I think the big question will be really, how much do I want to take on all the trolls? Because if I did write a book, I mean, it would be, I don't say this in and to be self-aggrandizing, but it will be like basically fact, citation, 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 citation. And I think a lot of the books that are going to be written, I know that some of the people following the case who have ambitions to write books, like early on, they became emotionally attached to some of these players. And I don't say this to, in any way disparage people who are writing books, but it's like then they found themselves defending people who, it was like the more, like Melanie Gibb, the more she talked, the more indefensible she became, and so I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges. I think the better books and documentaries are going to come from sources. And I'm not saying I'm going to write a better book, because I don't even know that I would write a book. I wrote 2 books, and they take an incredible amount of time to research and write. But I am doubling down on data science. I'm in a program where I'm learning more data science skills, particularly with the goal of, when I get copies of these files, I want to be able to, process this information algorithmically. I'm not going to be able to read, tens of thousands of pages. So, yeah, we'll see. We will see. Um, Someone said, "I think Lori is a psychopath." Absolutely. There's just no question in my mind. She's a psychopath. And yes, I do now understand that psychopaths are born, sociopaths are made. So, you know, who knows for sure. And I know that one of Lori's friends from school did say she was like a really sweet girl, like didn't get in trouble and stuff. So, who knows? May be a sociopath, but she's one of them. And I saw that in my last trip out to Phoenix, and I shared a screenshot of a text interaction I had with one of my kids, and it was, and I'm glad that I found that interaction. I didn't remember even having that interaction at the time, but I told this particular, I mean, it was, you know, um, uh, they were an adult. So I wasn't like, dropping this on like an 8-year-old or something. But I said, I think Lolo may be a sociopath. And yeah. And, it was just evidenced by like even, she shared this one allegation of Joe sexually abusing Tylee. I won't go into the details. I mean, it's so horrific, this thing that she passed on. And she was describing that, like Tylee, she said, yeah, to quote her, she said she was a teeny tiny baby. And then she went into this graphic detail of something that Joe did to her. And one, there was the issue of Tylee was standing right there. Like she was in the room. And Lori, first of all, this was so disgusting. I can't believe she would have even said this in front of Tylee. Uh, excuse me, who, according to her story, Lori's story, would have been a victim and a baby. But um, but then like her affect, it was like that, excited Lori that you have seen in some of her interactions, like her affect was so inappropriate. I'm not saying she was happy. It was just like she was kind of manic describing this, and she had that like weird kind of psychopathic, inappropriate giggle and stuff. And but then you could tell she had no awareness, like that her story made no sense. For this to have happened the way she described it, she would have either needed to witness it, someone else would have had to witness it, or Joe would have had to tell her. But then also, she didn't divorce Joe when Tylee was a quote teeny tiny baby, and like, but she had no awareness that this whole story made no sense. And I'm not saying that to like, like even when these allegations first came out, it was a reporter who picked up on that. I didn't know that Tylee had never made an outcry against Joe, and she passed on some of these court documents before they were out in the public. I mean, just like a couple pages that address this. Excuse me. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, that's just next level psychopath. And so it was based on that, as well as just like her complete disregard for my grief. Like if I even just teared up in front of her, she had this thing that she said several times where she said the world is a better place without Joe Ryan in it, and so like there was just not even a hint of sadness like that. You here is a person who died alone, who wasn't found for weeks, and then she didn't tell me, and all of those different factors. I mean, she just had no capacity for any kind of empathy. So, and also for Tylee, and I had also shared a story about how Lori asked me if our mother had poured boiling hot water down Joe's back, because she said that Joe said that. Now, Joe wasn't always very honest, and so so who knows, he may have told her that, but I said, well, I've never heard this, excuse me. And I said, and he doesn't have scars on his back, so I'm going to go with no, that probably didn't happen. And she turned to Tylee and said, maybe, and at this point, and I've talked in private Facebook groups about how Tylee would do this thing of like kind of hovering. There's this one spot where she would stand, and she wasn't in the same room with us, but she was listening to the conversations. Mm, excuse me. And so Lori turned to Tylee, who was in kind of like her little catbird seat, and said, maybe he just said that because that's what he wanted to do to you. And Tylee lost it. So Tylee didn't come unglued when Lori said this horrific thing about Joe sexually abusing her, but she really came unglued when Lori made this statement about Joe, her dad, wanting to do that to her. And so it was, yeah, it was just very, very dark. Elizabeth asked, do you think Lori will ever really feel the weight of what she's done? I don't I don't know. I I think to some degree, because I don't believe that she is incompetent. um I do think that uh, I think most likely with her, it's more the weight of the consequences of it, and the weight of everyone hating her, and the weight of knowing that when she gets out of this protected status, like after the trial, if she's found guilty and she goes to big girl prison, she's going to be eaten alive. There are women in prison who would give their eye teeth to be with their kids. So I don't think she's going to have an easy time at prison at all. And the fact that she led you know, such a, I don't know, just a charmed life, and gave all of that up, I think will make it even harder for her. And then you know, um, all the publicity and stuff. So I think she's very afraid of what, you know, um, what awaits her. Like, I don't think she has anything to look forward to. And, just if that picture on her ID is any indicator of what has happened to her sans Botox, um, excuse me, I think her beauty has also, um, the loss of beauty, not being able to have all of the creature comforts that she's used to. She's used to going into a room and always being, like the most beautiful person in the room, or at least among the most beautiful, and she had so much time to like work out and things like that. And that was really important to her. And so I think just the loss of all of those things, I suspect that her suffering will always be at the forefront of her mind over the suffering she caused others. Um, okay. Jennifer asks, can they recover Tylee's text messages or pings and her friends? Yes. Yes. And there was a note in I think it was the Gilbert police report, that they did admit text messages between Tylee and Colby into evidence. So that I only say that just because that's the only reference that I can remember where they actually talked about saving or admitting um, text messages of Tylee's into evidence. I'm hoping that Idaho got search warrants for Tylee's social media accounts, because Chandler got a search warrant for her Facebook account, but she wasn't active on Facebook. So she was much more active on Snapchat and Instagram. But they didn't get search warrants for those social networks. So yeah, so I'm sure I'm sure Idaho ordered those things. So there, there was there were a couple of interesting things from the Facebook records where someone, I think this was in December. So this was, I think, either right before or right after the story went public. Um, yeah. Uh, there was activity on Tylee's Facebook account, and someone accepted 2 friend requests. So yeah, there's definitely some sketch activity on her Facebook account, but I think the real story is going to come from her Instagram and Snapchat accounts. She also had 2 Twitter accounts. I don't think she was very active on them, though. She had one for her photography and a personal account. Someone just yelled pool party. Yeah, we have very little information about that pool party. But I imagine that will come out in the Charles uh, trial. Someone asks, did you ever feel Lori duped you with her charm? Yeah, I mean, definitely to some degree. I wasn't, it's a really hard to draw that line with Lori. Excuse me. Um, because, in my initial meeting with Lori and Joe, like I've talked about this before. I've never seen Joe so like just sappy in love. He was like a Tom Cruise, with Katie Holmes, jumping up and down on uh, Oprah's sofa. Not to that extent, but he was just so happy. And so, excuse me. Yeah, so it was on you. I was just so happy for him, and she was very, very nice to me. But I had really liked Joe's previous girlfriend, and she and I are still friends. We didn't stay in touch, all of these years. We got back in touch. She reached out to me when all of this happened. And so, and now we stay in touch, and she's still just amazing, but she was like very grounded, and just like, she was just really cool. And I liked Lori, but like his previous girlfriend is someone like I would have actually hung out with in like high school and college. And she and I, we just like, we had a lot more in common. Whereas with Lori, like I liked her, but we wouldn't have had anything in common outside of Joe. Like I don't think I'm someone she would have been drawn to, and vice versa. And I'm not saying that to be mean or to somehow distance myself, but excuse me. But yeah, so and then there were also complicating factors like that 2004 vacation that we had, that who knows what was going on between them at this point, because they had only been married, I think. I did eventually track down when they got married, because Joe sent me pictures from their wedding. Excuse me. I keep forgetting to drink. So I think it had been like about maybe 2 years. And so, yeah, but Joe was so problematic on that vacation. And I'm not saying this like to trash him. It's just, if you're not familiar with me, I really tend to be an automaton at times, like with facts. So, he was dissolving just so spectacularly and in front of kids, with his rage. And that had been a longstanding issue. So the focus when I left there, and even before I left, I was very concerned for Lori and Colby's safety. Excuse me. And so yeah, so I think that put her like and I don't know, it's really, I mean, like, and I say that because of like more of like a trajectory. Like if this is how Joe is acting in front of guests, oh, what is he like when no one's in the house? And I did feel like Colby was a trigger for, could have been a trigger for Joe, for like reminded Joe of a brother who they had a very, very contentious relationship. In fact, when I reached out to that brother to let him know that Joe had died, he said, "Well, I'm sorry to hear that, but I won't be going to the funeral." And I was like, "Well, it's a moot point. There was no funeral, And then he died a couple months after, all of this. So, so I was concerned that Colby, they were similar in appearance in some ways. They were very similar in personality, and yeah. So I think I was very sympathetic toward Lori, because Lori was playing more the role of the peacekeeper. Like she was just trying to salvage a positive experience for my kids, especially. And so, yeah, so yeah, I mean, that's just a really hard question. And one, I'm obviously biased, but I do feel like I do feel like because of that concern that I expressed about her safety, she was able to capitalize on that when she asked me to testify against Joe. And in that regard, it wasn't even so much that I was doing it for her. I was concerned about Colby. And, one of the things that will probably always torment me to some degree is the fact that, both Lori and Joe had told me that Joe had adopted Colby, and Joe had also told, um, no, yeah, and not Joe, sorry, the document that I have from this person who was involved in the case, it did confirm that, and also the FOIA docs, they did confirm that Colby was having visitation with Joe when they were separated or divorced. But yeah, had I known that Colby wasn't actually adopted and he could have stopped seeing Joe at any time, yeah, I mean, I'll never know, but I I can't imagine that I would have actually testified against Joe. But anyway, so but already on the 2007 vacation, there were a lot of really positive things. I mean, it was a spare no expense vacation. My kids, in many regards, had a wonderful time, but there were definitely red flags. And after that vacation, I didn't cut off contact with Lori. Like, we still, I think we talked maybe once or twice, maybe, I don't remember, but we still had like email and text contact. And she did invite me out, like, she would invite me out to visit them, even just a few years before all of this happened. But I didn't want my kids exposed to any of them. And so, yeah. So I think I wanted to have a relationship with Tylee. And so that made it difficult. But yeah, I mean, one of my kids in particular wanted nothing to do with Lori after the 2007 vacation. So, um, yeah, it's just very, very, very complicated. So I definitely wasn't ever duped by her, like a Melanie Gibb, or her niece, or Zulema, anything like that. But yeah, even when I was out there in 2018, she like um sh- she didn't try too hard, but she was trying to talk me into moving out to Phoenix, and there was no way that was happening. Like, I love where I live, but yeah, but I did think that was strange, like, that, she was still, even with it being a very rough visit with lots of tension, especially toward the end, that she was still making this plug for me to move out to Phoenix. Yeah, it was weird. um right, let me see. Okay, Celeste asked, do you find it strange that Chad's children are so on board and willing to say publicly their dad is innocent? I mean, that's their mom. Yeah, I did find that episode really disturbing. And I question if John Pryor pressured them to do that. I have no inside information. This is just pure conjecture. Because I just wonder if someone pressured them, like it was on them to somehow keep the needle out of their dad's arm. But it was right after that, like, I think within weeks, that the FOIA docs from Chandler were released. And that had, like, that gross love story that Chad wrote, and all of these, like, gross text messages between Chad and Lori and stuff. So you know I was I watch these shows and I'm so conflicted, because, like, I worry about the impact on their employability, like, and the down the road, like, this is going to be the gift that keeps on giving, in a very dark way. Like, these crimes, they're going to visit, Chad's grandchildren. Like, as they get older, they're going to be tethered to this, and so, like, making these public statements, and then, it was just such a weird show. um I just think, like, there's going to be more fallout from all of this. And so yeah, I did think it was weird. And I I think someone should have made a strong appeal to them to not, tether themselves to this case this closely. I I do wonder if the the two younger Daybell kids, or if all of them did it more for Garth and Emma than to help their dad. So the pressure may have come from within. We just don't know. But it yeah. I mean, it was just a short time later. That these documents came out, and it reminded me of, Janice and Summer holding out all of this time, not making any statements. Then they do that interview and, defend Lori and say confidently they just had no question that the kids were alive and Lori was, taking care of them. And it was just a few weeks later they found the kids. So yeah, I mean, these are fool's errands. And I think all of these people, the one thing that I personally hold against the Daybell kids the most is that, by spring, uh, that their property, like, the snow had melted, and even when law enforcement descended on that property in June, I think it was June 9th, the day that goes down in infamy. The grass was uneven, and there were obvious signs that, the earth had been disturbed in two different places. And here you have two missing kids. And yeah, so I was really angry with them for a while, just because I was just like, you can't tell me that, with two missing kids and your dad's a person of interest, you didn't go out on that property and you didn't notice that there are two unexplained areas of, the, you know, ground that looked different from the ground surrounding it. But yeah. And they would have also known that even if their dad had told them he buried a raccoon, that would be outside the norm. Garth talked about, I think a year or two before this, a raccoon being shot. And so, like, is that raccoon in the pet graveyard? Like, you don't put unwanted rodents in a pet graveyard. So, yeah. So, I get being loyal to your dad and not wanting him to be arrested, but I just don't know how all of these people claim to be like people of faith, have some kind of like Christian mores. And then it's like, oh, wait, but our dad is a person of interest. Well, screw all of our morals and our Christian beliefs, or godly beliefs. And that all goes out the window because we have to protect our own, in both the Daybell and the Cox families. And so anyway, but they're still victims. They, they lost their family. Their name is a household name, just about. So they'll be tethered to this story for the rest of their lives. Okay, I will take a swing at a couple more questions, and then we will call it a night. But if there is an interest in this, we will just continue to do this on the off weeks. Someone asked, have you encountered any other person in your life with a personality like Lori's? Don't need names, just interested in numbers. Um, yes, one person. Uh, and yeah. Different in some ways, but also very similar and dangerous. Okay. All right. I will scroll ahead to the newer, see if there are any other questions. I haven't seen any for a little bit. Okay. Ocean Rocks asked, how did Lori explain Tylee's absence on her own birthday? We don't know. Yeah, we don't know. Apparently, according to, I think it was according to Summer texted Tylee happy birthday and got a text back. And we don't know if Colby tried to call Tylee on her birthday. He really forced the point about wanting to talk to her 4 days later. So it would have been September 28th. And, that was when he said he was worried and stuff. But, obviously he didn't talk to her. So, yeah, I mean, that's been a big question for me. How, but at the same time, you see where Tylee was largely ostracized from the family. So, I've talked about in one of the lives about how Tylee wasn't at Colby's wedding. And people will say, and I don't mean to make fun of anyone, but they'll make comments like, I hate to say it, but Tylee didn't have the look that the Cox family, appreciates or something like that. But it's such a raging statement of the obvious. I mean, obviously, the Cox family, they come across as very shallow. I mean, here, Janice, her grandkids are gone. Her her daughter is in jail. All of this stuff is, just like blowing up around her. And in an interview, she talks about Lori being a cheerleader, and she was just always, like good at making people beautiful, and all of these things. And it's like you could see like your grandchildren are missing. They are unaccounted for. We also know because someone released this video that Summer had made for Alex's service that only a few people attended. The kids were nowhere to be found in this video. So, and this video was made somewhere in December, January. I think his funeral was in January, I heard. But, so it would have been made somewhere in that time period. I mean, it was quite a bit after this that Summer had said, oh no, like, like Lori would never do anything to her kids. And she was just so confident that the kids were safe. And then it's like, oh yeah, well, why did you make a video without Tylee and JJ in it. All the other cousins, Colby's in it, but Tylee and JJ aren't. And so I think that they all knew the kids were gone, as in dead. I don't think that anyone in the Cox family had any question that the kids were gone, because the little bit that we know pales in comparison to what this family knew. I've talked about this before. It's a very gossipy family, and a lot of really strange things were going down. And you had family members pitted against each other. And so, yeah. So, just the fact that is like Tylee's 17th birthday came and went. And clearly, obviously, no one talked to her, and that was okay. And so, yeah. But then, shortly after that, there would have been Halloween. In fact, I thought it was interesting that for Halloween, Lori, was it? No, not Lori. Excuse me. Melanie and Alex. Lori asked Zulema the the day before Halloween if Melanie and Alex could stay with her. And I thought that was weird. It was like, well, just a few weeks after this, Zulema and Alex married, but Lori is asking Zulema if her quote unquote boyfriend and Melanie could stay in Zulema's house. And they stayed, Melanie and Alex stayed together in a bedroom, because Zulema said they can have my bedroom. And but Zulema said something about like, that like she would be trick or treating with the kids, and Lori was like, "Oh yeah, I forgot tomorrow was Halloween." But so that also begs the question, like, why wasn't anyone suspicious when they didn't get pictures of JJ in his costume? I mean, there's just, anyway. So yeah. Gonna get all wound up. Someone said, I thought the nosy neighbor worked in insurance. He did. But it was like I think MLM insurance company, like multi-level marketing. So thank you, Christy. She said, don't give up. Okay. No, thank you, Nettie. And thank you, Jeanette. So apparently I missed my calling. I should have been a profiler. It's interesting though. There was one time, so I watched true crime for 20 years. Now I can't watch any of it, but there was one show that I watched where they interviewed a profiler. I think it was a profiler with the FBI, maybe. And or it might have been in the context of a show, but they were talking to a profiler, and I thought it was so interesting that the person said, well, if you start with the assumption that everything that people do is for a reason, then it gives you a jumping off point. They didn't word it that way. Jumping off point that's kind of one of my go-to phrases, but that's what I took away from it. Like, it was just so like straightforward, not saying like, obviously there's a lot more that goes into profiling, but I just thought it was so interesting that they took a common sense approach. Like, well, and the other point they made is that because of that is why people have patterns. We have patterns that we don't even recognize that we have. Like, if someone were to analyze my hours of videos and talking about this stuff, I'm sure there are things that they would pick up on, like ticks of, there were things that I picked up on even in watching, which was incredibly awkward, like watching some of my interviews, because I could tell from my eyes, I could tell when I was like, picturing things, because I have this tendency to picture what I'm talking about, and sometimes it's, I could just see the trauma in my face, and especially in my eyes, because I become like crazy eyes when I'm picturing some of this stuff. And so anyway, so all that to say, like, we all have well-worn paths, we have patterns, and those patterns can be used against us when we, turn to the dark side, when we engage in criminal activities. And so, yeah, so I think it's interesting, like when I'm going through some of these FOIA docs, and not just me, there are people who are far more brilliant than I am, going through these documents, and building, compelling cases against these players. I have no doubt about that. At least in Idaho, Arizona, that'll be icing on the cake if any justice comes out of Arizona. But excuse me. But yeah, it just all starts with, everything they do for a reason. So like there was this one exchange that Zulema had with Lori, and I'm reading these text message exchanges, and and she definitely has patterns. They had patterns, like Lori and Zulema. They had very solid patterns. Like Lori would ghost her, sometimes for weeks, sometimes as a punishment, because Zulema said something she didn't like, or Zulema was trying to be the prophet too much, and so but then Zulema also had patterns of just being like really cloying toward Lori, being a sycophant, just she's just like basically throwing up rainbows, just trying to curry Lori's favor. And Zulema, I think she knows, like, she's not in a top spot, even though she had a higher trust rating than Melanie's. Um, you know, sh- she was never going to get in like that top three. She just wasn't ever going to get there. And so, and I think that's why she engaged in so much flattery. But then she upped the ante, and she shared with Lori, I had a vision, or something to the effect that God has shown me, one of your family members is going to die. And Lori replied, "Call me." And I think it was like with multiple exclamation marks. And I just remember feeling so much anger as I read this, because I was just like, that is why you did that. You wanted to pull ahead. You wanted a front row seat. And you knew that Lori wanted her family members out of the picture. This was before anyone, well, besides Joe, this was before Charles or either of the kids had been killed. And then like, she obviously had Lori's attention at that point, and Lori's disposition toward Zulema changed. I mean, I wouldn't say it was night and day, but Zulema was in that spot. Like, Zulema earned her seat at the table by validating what she knew was Lori's desire for her family members. I believe that she knew Lori wanted her family out. And we know from the testimony she shared that, Lori had said, and if you're the only one left in your family, that's okay. So that was October 2018. So, yeah, and Zulema was in that meeting, and this would have been, I think, yeah, Zulema's first encounter with Lori. And like I said, Lori has no filter. So, I think the women in Hawaii, I think they know so much more than any of them are saying, because Lori would have been complaining, and we know that Lori complained about how hard it is to live with someone who is so dark and getting in the way of her mission. And at this time, she wasn't even living with Tylee. Like, she had abandoned Tylee, and all of these people knew she had abandoned Tylee. But yeah, so Zulema would have known that, and that's how that's how she got into that enviable place. And I think that to some degree she came to regret it, because I was very surprised to find out that she was the one who had asked Lori right before Charles was killed if there was any way to turn him back to the light. And Lori did not like that. And you can tell she didn't like it because like there was just silence. And, so she needed Zulema to be there, to be like, on her six. And then Zulema asks a question like this, like Zulema was aware of the teaching. There was no turning someone back to the light once they became a zombie. And so we know that from Ian, and we know that from there was another place where that had been codified. And so, yeah, so, but that just goes to that point of, Zulema had a pattern. And so when she sent that text, having read all of these insufferable interactions, I mean, it was really uncomfortable reading a lot of this. I mean, it is a case study in arrested development. I mean, them talking about, like them miraculously getting their periods back, and it was, bright red and crampy and all this stuff, like as if like that's a miracle. Like, who would want that? Who would want that? And so they I mean, it's bizarre just how childish they were in all of these interactions. But I think for Zulema, it speaks to how desperately she wanted to be involved. Whereas Melanie Gibb, she has a very different pattern, and we will talk more about Melanie Gibb, but yeah, she had a very different pattern from Zulema, and so each of these people who played a role, even though we don't have a whole lot of the picture, but from what we do, you see these patterns. So anyway, okay. On that note, I am going to bid you good night. But thank you for coming with all of these great questions. If I didn't get your question, I'm sorry. It's certainly not personal. I'm just like scanning the list and trying to get to as many as I can. But we will do this again. So good night.